number 6 and 7, still talking about the darkest day in history. We're going to talk about the transgression here. It's chapter 3. Why not? There we go. So Genesis chapter 3, verse number 6, verse number 7. The woman saw the tree, that it was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, the tree to be desired, to make one wise. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. So let's catch up to it here real quick. There we go. So the transgression, the course of the transgression was pretty simple, right? In verse number 6, the sequence is the same here in verse number 6, Genesis 3:6. You can see the same sequence as in James chapter 1, verse 15. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. Sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. That's 100% of the time, right? And so when the will gives way to lust, sin is the result of that. And so lust is not a virtue in any situation or by any stretch of the imagination, right? And so I know that we've had, I don't know if are we still in Pride Month, or is Pride Month over now? I can't remember, but yeah, so, but, right, we are making virtues of things that should be vilified, and we're making villains of things that are virtues in our present day and age. To uphold truth is now vilified. To be proud is now a virtue, right? And so that's the result, right, of the will giving way to lust. And it suspends reality. You have to suspend reality to do those things, right? In our present day and age, we've seen that, the suspension of reality, right? That people are able to pretend, right, in their own minds. Some even lie to themselves so consistently that they will staunchly stand for things that they know to be false. Right? And so, I mean, just things that you naturally know to be false, people will staunchly stand for them now, and that's because lust, right, the will has given way to lust. And so that is the natural progression there. It's also the same progression as you see in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. For all that is in the world, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. So the progression is always the same, right? It's the lust of the flesh, then the lust of the eyes, right? And then always ends up in, right, the pride of life. And so the progression is very simply this, right? In Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 there, she saw that it was good for food. Right? It was good for her flesh. Right? This is not to say that all things that are good for your flesh are bad for your spirit, but many things, right, that are good for your flesh are bad for your spirit. And many things that your flesh desires, right, are not. It's interesting, right? When you watch commercials for alcohol, me and my buddy have actually been having this conversation because he's not trying to stop drinking because he's got a problem, like an alcoholic problem or anything. He's just trying to stop drinking for health reasons, right? But it's interesting when you watch some of these commercials, right? How great alcohol is. It's good for everything, right? And then you can read articles about how great alcohol is, how, drinking a glass of wine a day is good for your health, and beer's not bad for you, and right? I mean, there's a million different things, but you know what alcohol is, right? It's poison. That's what it is. It's poison, and the reason, the reason that your body reacts like your body does to it is your body's trying to get rid of the poison. It's trying to push the poison out, and so your body reacts to it in that way. And so, but the way that it's sold to us, right, is look, it's good for food, right? And that's not the only thing in this world that's sold that way, right? The other thing that's sold that way, right, is sugars, right? Ice cream is nothing more than just a little bit of milk and a little bit of sugar mixed up together, right? If you get it from McDonald's, it doesn't even have milk in it, right? And so, I don't know if you know that, but yeah, McDonald's milkshakes aren't milk. So, but right, the reality is, man, this world sells us all kinds of stuff that way, right? It's good for your flesh. Anytime that something appears to be good for your flesh, it should be a red flag to you, right? Not to kick it out, but to investigate, right? And so, in this case, right, the food, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil appeared to be good for food, and that was the way the devil tempted her, right? The Bible tells us this, right? In Hebrews chapter 13, and verse number 4 there, he says, marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge, right? The devil tells us, right, don't worry about the things that God tells you not to do. Right? Don't sweat it. It's not a big deal, right? Sex is good, and it is, by the way, right? But it's only good when it's kept in the boundaries that God's placed it within. Right? There's many things that are good for your flesh, but they're only good for your flesh if they're kept within the proper restraints. Right? Water's a good thing. Right? You should drink water. It's good for you. But if you drink too much of it, you know what will happen? You'll drown. That's what will happen. You'll drown. Right? It's a good thing, kept within the restraints it belongs within, right? And so God placed the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden, and it was a beautiful tree, without a doubt. It attracted Eve, right? It was a beautiful tree, must have been beautiful fruit. It was certainly something to be seen. But it should have stayed within its boundaries, which was what? Stay away from that tree, don't eat that fruit. Right? And it's the same thing in our lives, right? Listen, marriage and sex, that's an easy one to pick on, right? But there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things that we can go over and say, look, like, these things aren't good for you, right? You drink too much soda, it's not good for you, right? There are a lot of things that appeal to our flesh. Lying appeals to our flesh, right? Gets you out of trouble for the moment. Saw a quote by a guy the other day, said that women are attracted to what they hear and men are attracted to what they see. That's why women will always wear makeup and men will always lie. Right? And so, but listen, the reality is, right, we are attracted to things that appear good for our flesh. That is what the entire advertising industry is built on. I can tell you this from experience, right? Because I read a lot of stuff on advertising because I'm in business for myself. And so I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to put out content on social media that will increase my business, right? You know what one of the number one keys to getting somebody to click on whatever it is you want them to buy is? 100 benefits. What are 100 ways that this will benefit them? Right? There's nothing on earth that'll benefit you in 100 ways. Right? But they sell you that way, don't they? Right? By the time that you get done reading some of the advertisements that you see online, you think to yourself, if I don't buy this thing, I mean, not only am I not keeping up with the Joneses, man, I'm not even keeping up with myself. Right? I mean, I've got to have it. If I don't have it, I don't know what I'll do. And then you buy it and it sits on a shelf at your house for the rest of your life. Right? Or sits in a box and in the garage, unopened, and gets sold at a garage sale shortly after your death to somebody who's collecting antiques. And so, right? So anyways, the lust of the eyes, right? It was pleasant. Not only was it pleasant to her flesh, it was pleasant to her eyes. The eyes are, of all of the things on the face of this earth that will cause you problems, your eyes will cause you more problems than anything else. Because your eyes are the thing that determines where your attention goes. And so your eyes are dangerous, right? And if you don't, there's a reason why David constantly talks about, right, shielding his eyes and putting, right, sometimes he's speaking of it in a spiritual sense, right, of shielding the eyes of his heart and things like that, right? But man, your eyes are dangerous. You won't desire something you don't see in general. There's a reason why advertisements on social media and television are more powerful than advertisements on the radio. You can hear about something and think, oh, that's interesting. But when you see it, you want to buy it. Right? I could tell you 100 things about a vehicle, right? And you'd go, that sounds good. But my vehicle does all those things. But if I show you a brand new shiny vehicle, you go, oh, wait. My vehicle doesn't look like that, though. Right? Your eyes, right? They're a dangerous thing. Eve's eyes were dangerous, got her in trouble, right? And so your eyes will imprint images on your heart, right, that you won't be able to get rid of. One of the biggest problems with things like pornography and stuff like that is you can't ever get rid of the image. You think you can, but you can't. You still see it in your head right now. As soon as I made mention of the word pornography, right, you can shuffle back in your memory, right, to images that you've seen over the course of your lifetime, right, that you should not have looked at or that you should not have seen. Right, it's instantaneous. Why? It's imprinted. Your eyes are more powerful than you think they are. You've got a powerful, powerful computer up here. More powerful than any computer on the face of this planet. It's got more memory space than any computer on the face of this planet. It's got so much memory space, right? There's not computers on the face of this planet, right? They could record your life, but they could not record all of the thoughts, processes, interactions that take place in your body over the course of your life. There's not a computer on the face of this planet powerful enough to do that, but you've got one in your head. You've got one in your head that's so powerful that sometimes you can be walking somewhere and you can smell something, and immediately in your head you're back in a moment in your past, sometimes as young as 3 or 4 years old. It'll bring up a memory that you haven't thought about for years. Right? It's a powerful thing. Your eyes are a powerful thing. You got to be careful, right, what you look at. Pleasant to the eyes. Notice it doesn't say that it was, right, it was disgusting, it was terrible, right? No, it was pleasant. Right? Not everything that's pleasant is good. Right? I remember one time, it's been a long time ago now. Well, Jerry Springer's dead, I think now, isn't he? And so, but I remember watching Jerry Springer one time, and he had I came in the middle of the show, so I had no idea what the show was even about. But there was an absolutely stunning girl on that platform that was revealed later that it was not a stunning girl. But right, listen, that may have been pleasant to the eyes, but it wouldn't have been pleasant later, right? It'd have been rather shocking, right? Like the Marine in the Philippines that took a lady boy home and ended up killing him in the hotel room, right, when he found out. And so, listen, pleasant to the eyes isn't what it's all about. Right? I remember I used to service this guy's house, did his pest control, and his wife was something, man. Every time that we'd show up, why didn't you call? You didn't even tell us that you were coming. And she was always on one, man. She'd yell and cuss, and she was something else. And I'd tell her, we spoke with your husband. Then he'd come out, and he would, he'd try and calm the situation down. She was very attractive. She was a very attractive woman. I couldn't have lived 2 seconds in a house with her. So his statement to me was, she's a witch, but she's mine. And that was his opinion of her. And so, right, there's a reason, right, why Proverbs tells you, right, it's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop, right, than in a broad house with a brawling woman. Why? Because just being pleasant to the eyes isn't what it's all about. Right? Sometimes you ever walk down the street and you see, man, an absolutely stunning girl with an absolutely ugly guy. Right? Or vice versa. And you think, what in the world do they see in that person? You know what they probably see? They probably see that they went for something else, and that something else was beautiful on the outside and ugly on the inside. That guy may be ugly on the outside, but he's beautiful on the inside. He doesn't cheat on her. He buys her flowers. He says the right things, right? He's there when he says he's going to be there, right? She never has to wonder what's going on, right? Or vice versa for him. That's what's happening, right? Listen, there's something to be said for it. The pride of life, right? It was desired to make one wise. Listen, the devil knows what it feels to us most. All sin ends up in pride. So whatever it is that you have the most pride about in your life, you can just trace that thing back. It's a sin. No matter how you cut it, pride is a sin. Now, we've come up with a million ways to make it not a sin. Humility is a virtue. Pride is not, never has been. It never will be. You're never going to make, there's no world in which pride is a virtue. You say, yeah, but I'm proud of my kids. Proud of what? Because I can take you and show you somebody that raised their kids better than you raised yours, and their kids turned out worse than yours. I know in your head you think it's because, well, yeah, it's because I did this and I did that and I acted like this and I acted like that, and that's why my kids turned out this way. No, it's the good grace of God that your kids came out the way they are. That's reality. Right? The devil constantly is assaulting us with the concept that we should be proud. We should be proud of what we've done, right? If you are successful, you've made money, whatever it might be, right? You've got a successful relationship or marriage, or right, you've got successful kids or whatever it might be. You should be proud of that. The devil's constantly telling you. While on the other side, God is constantly telling you, hey, every good gift, every perfect gift cometh down from the Father above, in whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Right? God's constantly telling you, hey, be humble. You're not so great. The devil's constantly telling you, have pride. Right? It's one of my issues with, right, the present day and age of, right, constant crucifixion of others, right, for deeds of their past, right? People are digging up things 25 years ago now, right, and blasting them all over the internet and on, right, news, right, shows and stuff. Well, you won't believe what we found out. Donald Trump, one time in a back room at this one house, he might have been, we're not sure, but we think he might have taken a toke. Right? I mean, it's craziness. Right? And it's not just Trump. I mean, they do it to Biden. Not that Biden would remember, but they do it to Biden, right? Everybody else, man. It's absolutely crazy. Right? I do, by the way. I've got a serious issue, right, with the way that some conservatives, whether they're Christian or not, are treating the situation with Biden, because there's zero compassion in it, right? You should feel sorry for the guy. Right? What's happening there, for lack of a better way of putting it, has got to be elder abuse. Right? But man, listen, the reality is, man, all of that stuff is a way of pushing away what we should be ashamed of, right? And building our pride, because while I should be ashamed of this, but that's okay, I don't have to be ashamed of that, because at least I didn't do that. Right? It's like the number of people that I've met over the course of my life who aren't divorced, and right, that's the pride and joy of their life is, well, at least I never got divorced. What does that mean? Honestly, I have no clue what that means. Because the only reason you aren't divorced, I promise you, the only reason you're not divorced is not because of some spectacular decision you made. Because I promise you, there's been 100 points in time over the course of your marriage where it could have ended that way. Right? But your wife or your husband, right? In some cases, It wasn't even that you guys didn't want to get divorced. It's that you were both so lazy you wouldn't go do it. And so now it's too far. You're too far along. You're like, may as well just stay now. Listen, it's craziness. The things that we will, right? We will build the shame for others while pushing away our shame so that we can feel better about ourselves. And that's all pride. And it all started right here. The pride of life, right, was desired to make one wise, right? And the devil started all that, right? Well, is that really what the Bible says, right? What's the consequences? Verse 6 and verse 7 there, the consequences of all of this, right? Is their eyes are opened. They're wise now. Their eyes are open, right? You know what they found out? We finally made a man. We know it. You know what we know? We know we're naked. Well, that's not good. Right? That's exactly what ends up happening here, right? The saddest moment in human history occurs when Adam and Eve realize that they're naked. There's a lot of stuff that can be said about the fact that they're naked. One thing that's said about it, right, is it shows that they're vulnerable. And they're not like the animals. The animals have a covering and they don't. In fact, they have nothing to protect them from nature. They're exposed to nature and to everything else. Let me tell you something about being a human being. You just think you're the top of the food chain. You're not. Right? I mean, the reality is you ain't the top of the food chain. You might be able to kill the top of the food chain, but you're not it. Right? We are vulnerable is what we are. And if the only thing that God gave us to protect ourselves from the world around us, you realize that God gave you no defensive weapons to protect yourself from the world around you. You don't have claws, right? You don't have fangs, right? Which would be pretty cool. Right? Right? I've seen some women that look like they got claws after they get out of the nail salon. All right? Right? You don't have fangs. I mean, you got nothing. Man, you don't even have strength. Not if you compare it to a gorilla. Only thing you got to defend yourself from the world around you is that thing right there. You can think. And you know what it is that defends you from the world around you? It's not just that you can think, because other animals can think and they can act on instinct, right? The thing that protects you from the world around you is you have the ability to think about the future. That's the difference between you and the animal. Right? Sin defiled her husband as well, right? We see there in the last part of verse 6, Adam took the fruit too. We don't know exactly what the conversation was that took place between Adam and Eve. Here's what we do know, right? Verse number 17, it says, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Right? Here's what we know. You know what Adam did? Same thing you'd do, sir. He listened to his wife. That's what he did. Right? We all say, I wouldn't listen to her. Bet me. Right? We all know better than to not listen to our wife. Right? She knows where we sleep. Besides that, you don't want somebody who's mad at you cooking your food. So, anyways, not that I think that any of the women in here would put pine sol in your food or anything like that, but there are a lot of documentaries about it. I'm just saying, sir. All right, but listen, the reality is Adam listened to his wife. He hearkened to the voice of his wife. More than likely, right? You and I would have done the same thing. You know why? Compassion, empathy, right? Love. We'd have done the same thing. And he did it. And by doing that, right? There's a lot of ways that this is put out, right? That Eve was super evil and she convinced Adam to take this, and right? There's a lot of ways that this is discussed. I don't think that Eve was evil in her intention. I think she was desperate. And I think Adam was human. And I think Adam said, right, listen, this is the original Romeo and Juliet. Adam said, if she's going to die, I'll die with her. Right? Which, by the way, is a good picture, right, of who Adam is a representation of, which is Christ. He's the first Adam. Adam is the first Adam. Christ is the second Adam, right? He says, I'll die with her. It shows you a couple of things. It shows you, first of all, man couldn't die for the sins of somebody else. If that was Adam's sacrifice for Eve, it didn't save Eve. It just condemned Adam. So whenever you hear this one come from somebody, well, yeah, but my buddy was in the military and he took a bullet for somebody else and died. You don't think he went to heaven? No. Right? Sacrificing for the life of another won't save the other, and it won't save you. Right? Didn't save Adam, which is, by the way, what I think probably is most likely what happened. Was Adam thought that he was sacrificing for Eve. I'll give up my life, right, for her life. And it didn't work out. Your sin always affects others, right? Achan's probably the best example of that. I won't read through this, but we all know the story of Achan, right? And Jericho. Don't take anything. Achan takes stuff and hides it. Says, nah, nobody will ever know. But when it was all done and said, they did know. And it cost Achan and every part of his family, his belongings, everything went down with Achan. Your sin affects more than just you. The concept that somehow you can get into sin, and over the course of your sinful life, the only person that you will affect is you, is just not a reality. Your sin will affect others. What does that mean? Here's what it means. It means for all of our posturing about how much better we are than somebody else, so what? You think your sin hasn't affected others? You think that your sin has been solitary to you, you're the only one that's been affected by it? Right? We hear about somebody like Jimmy Swaggart, and we go, oh, man, that guy. I can't believe that he was caught with a prostitute out in the middle of the desert. Right? The number of people who suffered because of him. You want to know all you're doing? You're elevating his shame and at the same time elevating your pride. You think that your sin hasn't affected other people? Your lack of sacrifice for God, your lack of doing what you should do, right? You don't think that that's affected anybody? It's only you. You're an island to yourself. You're not an island to yourself. Your sin affects others either. That's why all of us need what? We all need God's grace. Let me tell you what else I need. I need your grace and you need mine. Because we're all a mess. It's amazing to me that the one place where you should be able to come and be guaranteed that you'd find grace is church, and yet it's the place where the least people come to find grace, because people come in here and they feel like they're judged, and we say, well, that's because of the way they feel. Is it? Or is that the forward face of the church? That we don't offer grace? Right? We say, that's fine. It's fine. You want to come? That's fine. You want to come to church? You want to come to Jesus? All that stuff, that's fine. But you better be ready to change if that's what you're going to do. That ain't grace, brother. And there's no way you can turn that into grace. Let me tell you what grace is. Come. Just come. Let me tell you something. God can do the work. God can change people. The grace of God is far more powerful than the judgment of man. That's reality. You can hold things over people's heads. You can tell people, well, I'll forgive you when you finally get right with me and you say I'm sorry and all this other stuff. And man, you got to do this and that and check this box and jump through that hoop, and then you'll prove to me that you're sorry and I'll forgive you. That's useless. Let me tell you something. Nobody could ever meet my requirement for forgiveness. And nobody can meet yours either. I know you think you're full of grace, but you're not. What you are is you're full of yourself. And so until you feel like they truly mean it, you're not going to forgive them. Doesn't matter how many times they say sorry or anything else. Aren't you glad that that's not the way that God puts it? When I finally feel like you mean it? No, he says what? Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. That's the way he puts it. Thank God for grace. Because if it weren't for grace, listen, I got no hope if it's not for grace, and neither do you. What we all need is grace, right? And by the way, that's what Genesis teaches us. You know what you learn by reading about Eve's situation here? Here's how too many of us read Eve's situation. We read Eve's situation from out here and we go, Eve, what a mess. She had it perfect. She got the perfect husband. She got the perfect house. She got the perfect garden. She got the perfect life, and she screwed the whole thing up. That's how we read it. Instead of reading it as, I'm Eve. And I will take down everybody with me if you give me a chance. I will beg you to share in my sin so that I don't feel as bad about it. I'll beg you to be a bigger sinner than I am so that way I don't feel as bad about it. Well, I may be an alcoholic and I may drink a 12-pack a night, but Joe drinks a 24-pack. Yeah, he's just as drunk as you. All right? Well, yeah, I may smoke cigarettes, but my neighbor smokes pot. I'm not as bad as him. And the neighbor over from that, man, he's smoking crack. So, I mean, as far as smoking goes, I'm on the low end of this thing. All right? Listen, that's what we do. We will take down everybody with us if you give us a chance. But man, when you begin to understand and you start to see the grace of God in the situation in Genesis and the grace of God throughout the Old Testament and the grace of God, man, coming to fruition in the New Testament, you begin to understand that, listen, I'm messed up, you're messed up, maybe we're all messed up. Maybe we're all so messed up that we are irrecoverable. And so God had to send his son to die for us. Maybe that's the situation we're all in, right? Timothy puts it this way concerning Adam, right? Adam wasn't deceived. Adam knew what he was getting himself into. Eve got deceived, but Adam didn't. Adam knew. Right? You think Adam made a conscious decision to just kill himself? Yeah. Absolutely. You know what Adam saw? He saw the one thing on this earth that had been created just for him. And he saw that it was going to die. And he said, I don't want to live without it. And so he gave his life. Rather than live without the one thing God had created for him. Tells you a lot of stuff, doesn't it? Tells you this is what marriage should look like. Right? You should be willing to give your life for your wife, like Christ gave his life for the church. I'm not saying that Adam gave his life in the proper way. Right? Adam should have waited. He should have talked with God that night. That's what Adam should have done. Should have waited. He should have said, God, there's got to be a way that we can work this out. That's what Adam should have done. But that's not what Adam did. Adam jumped the gun. That's my opinion, right? You can take it, leave it. I really don't care what you do with it, right? The other thing that it shows you, though, right, it shows you that that's what it should be. Shows you that that's what grace is. Grace is not joining you in your sin, but it is empathy with you as though I had committed the sin you committed. And saying, if I was in your situation, how would I want people to respond to me? It's amazing, right, that we think that we know, right? Well, I'll tell you what I'd want. I'd want justice. You don't want justice now. You stinking no good liar. You know what you want? You want to eat a gallon of ice cream and not gain a pound. That's not justice. You know what that's called? That's called mercy and grace. You want mercy and grace. You want to eat a pound of, you want to eat, man, a bucket of ice cream and not gain a pound. You want to drive over the speed limit and not get caught. You want to roll the stop sign and there not be a cop. What you want is grace. You don't want justice. None of us want justice. The only one that really wants justice is God. And you know what? God's the only one that knows what justice really is, right? Anyways, the responsibility for plunging the entire human race into sin is Adam's, right? Wherefore, as by one man's sin entered into the world, right? 1 Corinthians tells you the same thing. As in Adam, all die. It was Adam that plunged the world into sin. It wasn't Eve, right? We all point the finger at Eve. Eve, 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 Eve. But it ain't. It's Adam, right? Adam's the one that puts everybody in sin. Adam puts everybody in sin. You know how he did it? He did it trying to, in my opinion, he did it trying to do the right thing. Right? Go down with the boat. You know what it tells you? Your best decision is the wrong one. The way you think that God should save the world wouldn't work. Right? I don't know what Adam was thinking. Maybe Adam was thinking to himself, you know what? If I eat the fruit too, God can't kill us both. Right? You know, the old, they can't catch us all. Right? I don't know what Adam was thinking. Right? But I know this. I know that Adam made a conscious choice, and he chose creation over God. He may have thought he did it for the right reason, which is 90% of the time, when we make the wrong choice, we don't do it for the wrong reasons. How many of you sitting in here right now would admit, I'll tell you what I do. I like to make the wrong decision, and I like to make it for the wrong reason. That's what I do. I make the wrong decision, and the reason I make the wrong decision is because I was trying to do the wrong thing in the first place. No. You know what we do? We're trying to do the right thing. We wake up sometimes the next morning and figure out that was the wrong thing. I shouldn't have done that. Right? Which is very likely the way that Adam woke up the next morning, right? When he opens his eyes and notices, I'm naked. And I don't remember going to see God and looking like this. Something's wrong. I better fix it before God finds out. Right? So he makes himself an apron of fig leaves, thinking he can fix the problem himself, right? Adam doubles down on it. Right? You know what's funny about, right, Adam's situation is Adam doubles down on making the wrong decision by making an apron, like that's going to trick God. Right? In much the same way that we do it, right? We make the wrong decision, then we double down on it by acting like, no, well, look, I fixed it. I know I did the wrong thing, and I should have come to you to ask you how to fix this, but instead of coming to you, God, and asking you how to fix it, I went ahead and fixed it myself. You're welcome. Right? Doesn't end up right, right? Sin had defiled their hearts, right? Their sin defiled their hearts. They now knew what shame was. They didn't know what shame was before. You know what that tells you, right? They were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. But they are now. What does that tell you? Is shame a good thing or a bad one? It's a result of a bad thing. Right? I hear this preached all the time. Right? Especially lately. Been seeing a lot of posts about it on social media, right? We need to bring back shame. Do we? Is that really what's missing? Are we so deluded that we think we have exercised grace so much that we've made people feel like there's no shame for sin? Is that really what we think? Because I think that's absolutely insane. You know what I think we need? We need to bring back grace. That's what we need to bring back. We need to make grace the thing that everybody sees. Every message should end with how the gospel gives grace. That's what it should be. Everything in every message should point towards grace. everything that Paul wrote pointed towards it. You can't escape it in Paul's writing. Grace, 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 grace. Why did you leave the grace of God? Who came in and tricked you and lied to you and, man, got you to turn away? Grace, grace, grace. Listen, when you got in trouble, when you were young and you got in trouble, right? When you knew it was something that your parents would have grace for, did you have any problem telling them? No, you immediately went to them and said, what? I really messed up, right? I'm sorry. And you knew that they'd have grace and that they'd forgive you. But if you didn't think they were going to have grace, and you thought what was coming was probably not going to be grace, it's going to look a lot more like justice, you know what you did? Buried it. That's what you did. It may have come out later, but you buried it. Let me tell you something. Don't bury things, Christian. You may not be able to trust my grace. You may not be able to trust the grace of others. So I'm not telling you to stand up in service this morning and confess your sins vocally to everybody in here. That's a dumb idea. But here's what I am telling you. God's grace is perfect. You've never gone to God and got God's justice and not his grace. And let me tell you something else. Nobody in Scripture ever went to God with their sin and got justice. They all got grace. When David said, I've sinned, you know what David got? Grace. God said, here's the situation, David. There's got to be a consequence. I'm not telling you you'll always escape consequence, but consequence and justice are two different things. What did David deserve for having done that to Uriah? He deserved to lose his head. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. What did God give him? God gave him grace. That's what God gave him. You can't find me one person in Scripture went to God and said, God, I messed up. And God said, well, finally, now I can administer justice on you. They always got God's grace. I promise you, whatever your sin is, whatever you're in the middle of right now, whatever your situation is, I promise you this, if you go to God, he'll give you grace. I believe had Adam and Eve went to God and said, God, we messed up. We screwed the pooch here, God. You know what I think God would have done? He'd have had grace. That's what he would have done. Doesn't mean there wouldn't have been consequence. And the consequence may have looked very similar to what the consequence ended up being. They may still have been removed from the garden, all of that other stuff. But I think there would have been some differences. God's grace is always perfect. You can always trust God's grace. Whatever your sin is, go to him now. I promise you, you can trust his grace. God's not looking to put it on the front page of the newspaper. That may be what happens, but that's not what God's looking to do. God's grace is always perfect. Before that, they had been totally innocent. Now they knew what sin was, right? And worse than that, you know what they knew? They now realized their potential to be sinners. They realized how bad they could possibly be, which is something that some of us have forgotten, right? But anyways, Jeremiah 6:15, were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? They were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush. Therefore they shall fall among them that fall at the time that I visit them. They shall be cast down, saith the Lord. Jeremiah said, what? He says, listen, he says, the sin should bring, right? Should bring a blush to your cheek. That's why you need God's grace. Right? Listen, he tells you, right, their solution was weak, right? We'll make fig leaves. That's what we'll do. Right? Listen, you can't cover your sin and you can't cover your shame. The best thing you can do is go to God with it. If you've taken your sin to God and you've got God's grace, right, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. That doesn't mean you should go around town telling everybody what you've done. Right? But let me tell you something. You don't owe me anything. And you don't owe it. I don't owe you anything. As human beings, we've elevated ourselves to the point where we think that it's our job to be somebody's mama or somebody's daddy and keep them in line. And then when somebody steps out of line, they owe me. They should say sorry to me. I can't believe that they got out of line like that. Who are you? Who am I? Right? We're nobodies is what we are. Isaiah chapter 64, verse 6, and we'll cut off here. He says, but we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags, and we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind have taken us away. You know what's amazing about that passage of Scripture? We read that passage of Scripture as though it only applies to before we get saved. That's how we read that. Even though it's written to a nation that would have been the representation of the saved in the Old Testament. All your righteousness since you got saved is nothing more than filthy rags. And we are all in our iniquity. That's what we are. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. You might be a little higher on the sludge pile than I am, right? I tell people all the time, they're probably one of my favorite quotes from any movie ever. It's from the movie Pure Country. And George Strait is in a movie where he's a country singer, and he decides he doesn't want to be a country singer anymore. Anyways, he goes to a ranch, and he's helping them kind of get things back on top of things. Falls in love with a girl. Girl finds out that he's been lying to her, even though she doesn't know exactly what he's lying about. But her dad is this old man, and he looks at him after his daughter is mad at George Strait, tells him, you know what, it's a funny thing about that little white speck at the top of chicken crap. He doesn't use the word crap, but he says at the top of chicken crap. So that little white speck, that's chicken crap too. All right? And some of us, we just think we're the little white speck. Let me tell you what you are. You're still just poop. Which is exactly what Paul says, right? All my good works are nothing but what? Dung, he says. That's poop. Right? That's another word for it that we don't use in church. That's what Paul says. That's what he says about all his good works. It's what all our good works are. Thank God for grace, right? All right. You're dismissed. We'll be back in here in a